Hey there. Welcome back to Nook Bedtime. I'm here to help you relax tonight, or at least try to. So before we start, take a deep breath. Get comfortable. Maybe pull that blanket a little closer, because tonight's story comes from a place where even the wind carries secrets. The deep Appalachian woods. Now, if you're ready, dim those lights, and let's begin. It was the summer I turned 15 when my mom sent me to stay with my grandmother, way up in the hills of West Virginia. Her cabin sat on the edge of what locals called Whispering Hollow, a narrow valley thick with pines and the kind of fog that never seemed to lift, even when the sun burned high in the sky. The road up there was barely a road at all, just a twisting ribbon of gravel, with moss-covered stones poking through in shadows that stretched across it like long, dark fingers. Grandma used to say, "If the trees start leaning in, you've gone too far." I never really understood what she meant. Not then. Anyway, her cabin was small but sturdy, the kind of place built to last longer than its owners. The porch creaked under every step, and the air smelled like cedar, damp earth, and something faintly metallic, like rain before it falls. No cell service, no neighbors for miles, just the forest stretching out forever. Inside, the place felt warm, lived in. Old quilts folded neatly, photos of long-dead relatives staring down from wooden frames, and the constant ticking of a clock that didn't quite match any time I knew. Grandma kept to her routines. Up at dawn, coffee before words, and always locking the back door before sundown. When I asked her why, she said it like it was obvious. Because that's when they start moving. I laughed, nervously, and asked, "Who's they?" She just looked out toward the tree line and said, "You'll hear 'em soon enough." That first evening, the sun slipped behind the ridge and the sky went that kind of bruised purple that only lasts a few minutes. I sat out on the porch swing, listening to cicadas hum their sleepy song. The woods were calm, still, even. But just as the light faded, I noticed something strange. When the wind brushed through the trees, it didn't sound like leaves. It sounded like words. At first, I thought it was just the breeze, that soft, sighing sound the forest makes. But then I caught something in it, something that didn't fit. It almost sounded like my name, a long, drawn-out whisper, faint but there, and it came from the hollow. I froze, waiting to hear it again. Nothing, just the night thick and quiet. But when I told Grandma later, she stopped stirring her tea and gave me this look, like she'd been waiting for that moment. She said softly, "Don't answer it. No matter what you hear, don't ever answer." And that's when I realized this wasn't just an old story. Something was in those woods, and it already knew my name. That night, the cabin felt heavier somehow, like the walls were holding their breath. I lay on the small bed in the guest room, the window cracked open just enough to let in the night air. The forest outside hummed with the usual sounds, crickets, the distant hoot of an owl, but underneath all that, there was a rhythm, a kind of low, whispering pulse that seemed to come and go with the breeze. I tried to tell myself it was nothing, just the woods. The mind plays tricks when you're that far from town, right? Still, every time the wind shifted, I swore I could make out something. A word here, a breath there, and always that strange dragging sound, like someone slowly walking through wet leaves. I pulled the blanket over my head and tried to focus on Grandma's old clock ticking in the living room. Tick, tock, tick, tock. But then it stopped, just like that. Silence. No ticking, no crickets, nothing. The whole world seemed to pause. Then, from the tree line, that voice again. Soft, close, too close. "Eli." My heart just about stopped. That's my name. I sat up fast, staring out the window. The woods were dark, but the moon cut a pale strip through the clearing. And there, just beyond the fence, something moved. It wasn't big, just a shape, a shadow that didn't quite fit the rest of the night. It leaned, almost like it was listening. Eli, that same whisper, stretching the syllables like it was testing the sound. I stumbled back from the window, knocking over a cup on the dresser. The sound shattered the silence, and just like that, the night came rushing back. Crickets, wind, everything. When I ran into the kitchen, Grandma was already there, standing by the stove with a candle in her hand. She didn't look surprised. She just sighed and said quietly, "They've found you now." She pulled the curtains shut and started sprinkling salt across the doorway, muttering words under her breath that I couldn't quite catch. I tried to ask what was happening, but she wouldn't meet my eyes. Finally, she said, "It's the hollow. It remembers voices. The more you listen, the closer it gets." That night, I didn't sleep. I just sat there, wrapped in an old quilt, staring at the front door while Grandma hummed an old hymn under her breath. Outside, the whispering went on until dawn, and I could have sworn, just before the sun rose, someone knocked. Once, very softly. I first heard about him at a gas station. One of those lonely spots that look half abandoned even during the day. The kind with faded signs, a single humming soda machine, and a porch light that flickers like it's tired of trying. I was about 20 at the time. My cousin Mason and I were road tripping through the hills, trying to find old ghost stories for a college project. Back then, it was just research, folklore, we told ourselves. But folklore in Appalachia, well, it doesn't like to stay on paper. We'd stopped for gas, and while Mason went inside to grab some jerky, I noticed an old man sitting out front in a rocking chair. He had that mountain stillness about him, like he'd seen things, and the world had slowed down around him. He nodded at me. "Y'all ain't from around here," he said, his voice low and gravelly. I smiled. "No, sir. Just passing through. We're collecting local stories, actually. Ghost tales, that sort of thing." He looked at me a long moment, rocking gently. Then he said, "You best not collect too close to Briar Hollow. Some stories there don't like being told." Mason came out half laughing. "We'll risk it," he said. "What's the worst that could happen?" The old man didn't smile. He just stared off toward the tree line. After a while, he said, "You ever heard of the Lantern Man?" I shook my head. He leaned forward, elbows on his knees, his lantern-yellow eyes glinting in the porch light. And then he told us. They say it started about 70 years ago, when the mines were still open and men would work through the night. There was a foreman named Jacob Thorne, known for being hard but fair. He had a little girl, Clara, who used to meet him every evening at the edge of the woods with a lantern in her hand to guide him home after his shift. One winter night, a storm rolled through, a heavy, sleeting mess that turned the roads to mud. Jacob finished late and never found his daughter waiting. They searched all through the night, calling her name through the trees, holding up their lanterns against the rain. By morning, they found her little shoe near the old creek, but never her. Something broke in Jacob that day. He started wandering every night with his lantern, calling her name over and over again, hoping she'd answer back. But she never did. Then, one night, they found his lantern hanging from a tree branch out by Briar Hollow, still lit. No Jacob, just the sound of someone calling in the fog. The old man paused, eyes fixed on something far away. "They say he's still out there," he whispered. "That if you're driving through those back roads on a foggy night, you'll see a lantern swinging through the trees. And if it stops moving," he looked right at me then, "it means he's looking at you." We laughed it off, of course. You kind of have to, otherwise the fear sets in too deep. But as we drove off, I couldn't shake the image from my head. That lonely man with a lantern, forever walking those dark woods, calling for someone who never answers. The night came down thick, and the fog started to roll in like smoke from the valley. Our headlights barely reached 20 feet ahead, and somewhere out there, just beyond the trees, I thought I saw a light. The old man's story stuck with me. It shouldn't have. Mason and I had heard dozens of tales that trip, but that one, it crawled under my skin. Maybe it was the way he said it, or maybe it was because of how quiet the woods felt after. We left the gas station just before dusk. The sky had that washed-out orange look, like the light was draining from it too fast. The road wound down through the valley. No cell service, no towns, just miles of black trees pressing in close on both sides. Mason was driving, humming along with the static on the radio. I was half dozing, watching the trees blur by when the fog rolled in. At first, it was just a low mist curling along the ground, then thicker, heavier. Soon the headlights were only lighting up a wall of white. "Great," Mason muttered, leaning forward over the wheel. "Can't see a damn thing." We slowed down to a crawl. The road felt narrower, tighter, like it was shrinking around us. That's when I saw it. A light out in the fog, pale golden, swinging slowly from side to side. Not like car headlights, not steady. It moved like someone walking with a lantern. I sat up straight. "You see that?" Mason squinted. "Probably somebody's porch light." "There aren't any houses out here," I said. He shrugged, but I saw his hands tighten on the wheel. The light kept moving, closer now, bobbing gently between the trees. It wasn't fast, just patient. Then it stopped, right at the edge of the road. For a second, I thought I could make out a shape behind it, a figure, maybe, but every time I blinked, the fog swallowed it again. "Should I honk?" Mason whispered. Before I could answer, the light flickered. Once, twice, and then another light appeared behind it. Then another. 3 lanterns now, glowing faintly in the fog, hanging in the air like floating eyes. Mason's voice was small. That old man said there was only one, right?" I didn't answer. I just whispered, "Keep driving." He pressed the gas, but the car barely moved. The tires spun like we were stuck in mud, though the road was dry. And through the open window came a sound, soft, wet footsteps, pacing just out of sight. "Eli," my name again. The same whisper I'd heard back at my grandmother's cabin. I turned toward the woods, my heart hammering so hard it hurt. The light nearest the car swayed once, slow, deliberate, and for the briefest moment I saw him, a man, or what used to be one, tall and thin, skin gray like ash, his face half hidden behind the glow of the lantern he held. His mouth moved, but the words came from everywhere at once. "Help me find her." Mason slammed the accelerator. The car lurched forward, the lights vanishing into the fog behind us. For a few seconds, neither of us spoke. The fog thinned, and the road opened into the valley again. That's when I saw it in the mirror. A single lantern, swaying slowly at the curve we just passed. And even as we sped away, the light didn't grow smaller. It stayed the same size, like it was following us. We drove until sunrise without stopping. By the time we reached the next town, Mason was pale, shaking, staring at the road like it might reach out and grab him. We didn't talk about it. Not then. Not for years. But every now and then, when I'm driving late at night through those hills, I catch a flicker of yellow just beyond the treeline. And sometimes the radio crackles. A man's voice, soft and broken, comes through the static. "Clara?" That's when I turn the volume down and keep driving. Because I know if I listen too long, he'll find me again. There's a place in the mountains about 10 miles east of where my grandmother used to live. A patch of land the locals don't put on any map. Most folks around there just call it the Old Oak Clearing. I'd been hearing about it since I was a kid. People said the ground there was wrong, hollow, like something underneath had been digging for a long, long time. Hikers who passed through claimed they'd hear crying late at night, soft and low, coming from the roots of the biggest tree in the valley. Nobody went there after dark. Not even the hunters. But that was exactly why I wanted to. It was a few years after the Lantern Man incident. I'd been recording local folklore for a podcast project, and my cousin Mason, always the fool for adventure, came along again. We stopped by a diner in Greenbrier County to ask around about the clearing. The waitress froze when I mentioned it. Her hand stopped halfway to the coffee pot, eyes flicking toward the window like she expected to see something looking back. "You don't need to go there," she said. "There's nothing left but roots and bones." I asked what she meant, and she just shook her head. "You'll hear it," she whispered. "If you listen long enough, you'll hear it crying." We drove out that afternoon anyway. The road ended at a narrow trail, swallowed by mountain laurel and moss-covered stones. The air there felt heavy, not like normal forest air. It was still, too still, like the world was waiting for something. After about an hour of walking, we came into the clearing. And there it was, the oak. It was enormous, wider than any tree I'd ever seen. Its trunk gnarled and split like twisted muscle. The roots bulged up through the dirt in thick, tangled ropes, cracking the earth around them. You could see deep hollows between them like small caves leading underground. I knelt and pressed my hand to the ground. It wasn't cold like normal soil. It was warm, and it was humming. Mason was filming everything, joking about finding the old mountain ghost. But his voice sounded small out there, almost like the trees swallowed the sound before it could travel. We set up camp just before sunset. The plan was to record overnight audio, crickets, wind, anything strange. Then we'd pack up at dawn. As darkness settled, a faint mist rolled into the clearing. The forest went quiet, no birds, no insects. That's when I noticed something odd. The ground beneath our tent was sinking, barely just a few inches, but enough that we could feel the earth shifting, like something breathing slowly below. Mason laughed it off. Probably a burrow, or a sinkhole, but I knew better. The ground wasn't collapsing. It was moving. Around midnight, we built a small fire and sat near the roots of the oak. The bark glistened faintly under the flames, almost like it was sweating. Mason asked, "What if this tree really is alive? Like, aware?" I told him that sounded ridiculous. But the truth is, I'd been feeling it too. That strange, prickling sense of being watched. There was a low sound then, not quite a wind, more like a moan carried through the soil. We both froze. It came again, deeper this time, rising from beneath us. A trembling that rattled the stakes of the tent. Mason grabbed his flashlight and shone it into the gaps between the roots. The beam caught movement, something pale, something shifting just beneath the surface. He muttered, "It's an animal." I said, Then why is it crying? Because that's what it was now. A soft, rhythmic sobbing. It didn't echo like sound should. It pulsed through the ground, like the earth itself was weeping. We sat there, not daring to speak. And then, faintly, I heard words. Not clear ones, but fragments. Whispers that didn't belong to any voice I recognized. Below! Cold! Don't dig! The ground trembled again, harder this time. The fire flickered, sparks dancing up into the dark canopy. Something beneath the oak moved. A slow, dragging shift that made the dirt ripple like the surface of water. We stumbled back toward the tent, but Mason stopped. He had his recorder up, pointing toward the roots. "Say that again," he shouted. "Please, say it again." The crying stopped. The woods went dead silent. And then very clearly, a whisper came from right behind us. "It's already awake." We spun around. Nothing. Just the empty clearing, the mist curling through the firelight. Then the ground cracked. Not a little, a deep, sharp break, like the earth splitting open. A black gap tore through the base of the oak, right where the roots knotted together. Something moved inside it. We didn't wait to see what. We grabbed the tent half-collapsed and ran. Behind us, I swear I heard something dragging itself through the dirt. Slow, deliberate, like it wasn't chasing us, just following. When we finally reached the car, I turned back once. Through the fog, I could still see the clearing, and in the center of it, the oak stood perfectly still. But the roots were no longer in the same place. They'd shifted, spreading wider, reaching outward, almost like they were listening. We didn't speak for the entire drive back. Mason's footage was mostly static, except for one short clip. Right before we ran, the microphone picked up a low sound, almost below human hearing. When I slowed it down later, I realized it wasn't a growl. It was a voice, and it said, "You heard it cry. Now it will hear you." We didn't talk about that night again for a long time. A few weeks passed, and Mason started avoiding my calls. The footage he'd recorded from the clearing, he said he deleted it. But I knew he didn't. I could hear the way his voice shook when I mentioned it. The way he'd pause before hanging up. He wasn't sleeping well. Neither was I, because every night around the same time we'd heard the crying under the oak, I started to feel movement. Not under my bed or behind the walls. Deeper, like something beneath the ground outside my window was shifting in slow, steady pulses. At first, I told myself it was nonsense. Old house noises, maybe, or the mind's way of processing what it didn't understand. But one night, around 2 in the morning, I woke up to a soft scratching sound. Not at the door, not at the window, from below, like fingernails dragging across dirt. That's when I decided to go back. It was early October when I returned to the mountains. The air was colder, sharper, and the trees were shedding what little color they had left. I told myself I was going back for closure, to see the clearing in daylight, to prove to myself that nothing was there. But part of me already knew the truth. I needed to know what we'd awakened. The trail was harder to follow this time. Fallen branches covered most of the path, and the forest felt thicker, the silence heavier. The moment I stepped into the clearing, I noticed it immediately. The oak looked wrong. Its bark was darker, slick, like something had seeped up through the soil and stained it. The roots had shifted again, stretched outward, tearing up the ground like they were groping for something. And in the middle of the clearing, where our fire had been, the earth was split open. It wasn't a hole, not at first glance. More like the soil had been peeled back, curling at the edges. The air that came from it was cold, damp, and smelled faintly of rust and rain. I dropped to my knees, shining my flashlight inside. The beam caught something glinting, Mason's recorder. Half buried in the dirt, I reached for it. My hand brushed the soil, felt warm again, and then it moved. The dirt shifted around my fingers like water, parting just enough to show something beneath it, pale and smooth, like skin. I jerked back, heart pounding. The flashlight flickered. For a moment, I thought I saw fingers push up through the dirt. 5 of them, reaching. Then they sank back down, disappearing under the soil again. I stood frozen, listening. Nothing. No wind, no birds. Not even the creak of branches. Then a faint sound rose from below. A low, dragging inhale, like the earth itself was breathing. And beneath that, a whisper. It wasn't English. It wasn't any language I knew. But the rhythm of it was unmistakable words, repeating, over and over. Hear me, hear me, hear me. I stumbled backward, my boots sinking into the soft soil. The flashlight beam danced across the roots, and that's when I saw something that nearly made me drop it. There were carvings in the bark now, dozens of them, shapes that looked almost like faces, stretched and distorted, as if they'd been pressed into the wood from inside. And they were weeping. Thin lines of dark sap trickled from the eyes, running down into the cracks of the trunk. The smell was sharp, metallic, the same as the air that first night. I don't remember running, but I remember hearing the sound behind me. A scraping, dragging noise, like something pulling itself through the dirt. It didn't chase me exactly. It just followed. When I finally made it back to the car, my hands were shaking too hard to get the key in the ignition. I kept looking out the window, half expecting to see that oak shifting toward the road. But the woods stayed still. Back home, I couldn't shake what I'd seen. Mason wouldn't talk to me at all. I sent him a message that night, told him I'd gone back. He didn't reply. A week later, his mother called me. He was gone. She said he'd driven out toward the mountains and never returned. His car was found parked on a dirt road, door open, engine cold. Inside was a single tape recorder. She asked if I wanted it. I said yes. The tape was cracked, muddy, like it had been buried. When I played it, there was static at first, then wind, and then Mason's voice. He sounded terrified, breathing hard, whispering, "It's moving. God, it's moving." Something heavy scraped in the background, a sound like roots tearing from the ground. Then I heard him cry out, and after that, only silence. Except it wasn't silence. If you turned the volume all the way up, there was something faint, a voice low and steady. It wasn't Mason. It wasn't human. It said, "It remembers who listens." I didn't sleep that night, or the one after, because the whispering had started again. Not from the woods this time, from under the house. I tried ignoring it at first, but it only got louder. The same slow, mournful rhythm we'd heard under that oak, crying that rose and fell with the night wind. I went outside, flashlight trembling in my hand, and crouched by the foundation. The ground there was damp, soft. I pressed the beam close and saw something pale glinting just beneath the surface. A fingertip. I stumbled back, but before I could run, a voice rose out of the earth, calm, almost gentle. "You dug too deep." Then silence. The next morning, the ground was flat again. No marks, no hole, just the faint scent of wet soil and iron in the air. Sometimes, when it rains, the dirt near my porch bubbles, little bursts of air escaping from below. And at night, when everything else goes quiet, I can hear that low sound again. The breathing, slow and patient, like it's waiting for something. I don't go near the woods anymore, and I don't dig. But sometimes I wonder what would have happened if I had kept listening. Because whatever lives beneath those roots, it remembers me. There's a stretch of road that winds through the southern edge of the Blue Ridge Mountains. No cell service, no lights, just miles of twisting asphalt between dense pines and the kind of silence that makes your ears ring. I drove that road one autumn afternoon. I wasn't really looking for trouble, just chasing stories again, same as always. A local historian had told me about an old mining settlement, abandoned sometime in the 1920s, never officially mapped. He said the only thing still standing was a stone well. He called it the Crying Well. I thought it was just another bit of folklore, one of those things locals whisper about to keep kids from wandering too far. But the way he said it, the way his eyes went distant when he mentioned the sound, stuck with me. "You'll hear it before you see it," he told me. "And if it starts calling your name, you turn around." The trail wasn't easy to find. There wasn't even a sign, just an old fence post wrapped in rusted wire. A faded "No trespassing" sign half buried in moss. I parked the car by the road and started walking. The path wound through tall grass and blackberry bushes that caught at my jeans. Every few steps, the ground sank slightly underfoot, soft, damp, like the forest hadn't forgotten the weight of what used to stand there. After about half an hour, I saw the first sign of the old town. A row of wooden beams sticking out of the dirt, the remains of a building long since collapsed. A broken wagon wheel leaning against a tree, and strangest of all, a single lantern hanging from a branch. Its glass fogged, its metal rusted nearly through. Someone had lit it not too long ago. The smell of kerosene still lingered faintly in the air. As I moved deeper into the clearing, the forest opened up into what must have once been the main street. A handful of rotted foundations, the outlines of homes and a small general store. The windows were just empty frames now, the wood eaten away. And in the center of it all stood the well. It was made of stone, thick blocks stacked neatly, though parts had crumbled. The wooden roof over it was half gone, the rope long since frayed. At first it looked ordinary, old, sure, but nothing out of the ordinary for a place like this. Until I realized something. There was water dripping from the stones. The air was dry, no rain in days, but steady droplets slid down the side of the well like it was sweating. Each drop hit the ground with a sound that was just slightly off. Not a splash, more like a soft plunk with a hollow echo underneath. Like the well was deeper than it should have been. I knelt beside it and peered over the edge. The inside was black, impossibly dark. I couldn't even see my reflection, just the faint ripple of something moving far, far below. I dropped a pebble. It took nearly 7 seconds before I heard it hit. And when it did, the sound that came back wasn't just an echo. It was a whisper. At first I thought it was just the wind curling down through the shaft. But then, it changed. A rhythm, pattern. I leaned closer, heart picking up. It was a voice, soft, distant, almost human. "Help me!" I froze. For a long moment I didn't breathe. The sound came again, clearer this time, rising up from that impossible depth. "Please help me." It wasn't a trick of air or acoustics. It was pleading. I took out my recorder, old habit by now, and set it on the edge. The mic light blinked red, and I whispered into it, "October 14th, 6:32 p.m. Found the Crying Well. No wind present. Hearing a voice." The recorder picked up everything. The crickets, my breathing, and that low, faint echo. Please, it's so dark. The sound was weak, desperate, but the strangest part? It sounded familiar. Something about the cadence, the tone. I couldn't place it right away, but it was close. Like hearing your own voice through a wall. A sudden breeze pushed through the clearing, and I swear the air temperature dropped 10 degrees in a heartbeat. My breath came out white. The voice grew louder. Please don't leave me. My hand brushed the edge of the stones. They were slick, almost pulsing, like the water was leaking from inside the rock. I stumbled back, nearly tripping over a root. The whisper followed. Don't go. Then silence. Just the slow drip of unseen water and the wind moving through empty doorways. I packed up the recorder and backed away. Something about that voice, the way it matched my rhythm, my tone, was wrong. It wasn't just repeating words. It was mimicking. By the time I reached the tree-line, the sun was gone, and the shadows between the trees felt thicker than before. But before I turned back for the car, I glanced over my shoulder one last time. The well was still there, standing in the middle of that ghost town. But the dripping had stopped, and though I was 50 yards away, I swear I could see the reflection of something pale leaning over the edge, as if something else was looking down into it too. When I got back to the car, my phone buzzed for the first time in hours. One new voice message. The timestamp was from 10 minutes earlier. It was my number. I pressed play. Static. Then faintly, please help me. My own voice. That night I couldn't sleep. Even after I'd left that clearing miles behind, my mind wouldn't stop replaying that voice. The way it had sounded just like me. Same inflection, same slight tremor when I'd said, help me. I listened to the recording over and over in the motel room. The playback was faint, distorted by static, but when I slowed it down, I caught something new. A second voice under mine. It whispered between my own words, as if finishing my thoughts. It said, come back. The next morning, I told myself I wasn't going to. I had enough proof of the legend, solid audio, even a time-stamped voicemail from my own number. That should have been enough for any sane person. But curiosity is a funny kind of infection. By afternoon, I was already driving back toward the mountains. The clouds hung low that day, heavy and gray, pressing down on the treetops. The kind of weather that feels like the world's holding its breath. When I parked by that same rusted fence post, it was already close to dusk. I brought a flashlight, a portable mic, and an old rope, just in case I needed to lower the mic deeper this time. The clearing looked different in the evening light. The shadows from the tree line stretched long and thin, crawling toward the center where the well stood. The air was still, no crickets, no birds, just that heavy kind of quiet that feels like it's listening. As I walked closer, I noticed something strange. The stones around the well were dry, completely dry, not a single drip. But the ground was damp, and the grass near the base was darker, matted down like something had crawled out and lain there to rest. I set the recorder down again. Hit record. October 15th, I said quietly. Returned to the crying well. 6:58 p.m. The dripping has stopped. I leaned over the edge. Blackness again. Endless. I dropped another pebble. This time I didn't hear it land. Just silence. Then a breath. Not mine. A slow, wet inhale that came from below. Then a voice, low, weak, but clearer than before. You came back. My hands went cold. It wasn't repeating anymore. It was responding. I tried to stay calm, to rationalize. Maybe an echo. Maybe sound bouncing off the stone. But then it said my name. Daniel. That's when my breath hitched. I hadn't said my name all day. Not once. Who are you? I called down. The voice waited a beat before answering. You left me here. I stepped back instinctively. My light flickered just for a second, and when it steadied, I noticed something inside the well movement. A faint shimmer, like water swirling far below. But there hadn't been any water before. The air around the well began to shift, cool air pouring up from the shaft, carrying with it a smell that hit hard: damp earth, rot, and something else. Something old. The voice came again, rising up in waves. It's so cold down here. It's dark. I waited. I should have left. I knew I should have left. But there was something about that voice, something that sounded more like memory than sound. I found myself kneeling, leaning closer, trying to make out a shape in the dark. The beam of my flashlight caught the stones partway down, wet, slick, as if they were breathing. Then the voice whispered softly, almost lovingly, "You can see me now." And from the blackness, something blinked. Two pale reflections, like eyes opening underwater. The light flickered again. The temperature dropped. I could feel the cold coming off the stones now, radiating upward. Then came the sound, slow, rhythmic, deliberate. Thud, 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 like hands. Something was climbing. I scrambled back, heart hammering, but the voice kept calling, louder now, desperate. Don't leave me here again. The rope at the edge of the well began to move, tightening, shifting, though there was nothing attached. I didn't think. I grabbed the recorder, shoved it in my pocket, and bolted for the tree line. Behind me, the sound kept coming, scraping, dragging, like nails on wet stone. I didn't stop until I reached the car. When I finally dared to look back, I saw it, just for a second. A pale hand gripping the edge of the well. Fingers long, skin almost translucent, like it hadn't seen sunlight in decades. And clinging to the stone, it began to pull. I drove until I hit the highway, didn't even glance at the rearview mirror. Later that night, in the motel room, I played back the recording. It was warped, distorted, but between the static, I heard something new. After I'd run, after my own footsteps faded, there was another voice, deeper, closer to the mic. He always comes back. Then a wet, dragging sound, and a quiet breath, the sound of something standing right behind the recorder before it shut off. I deleted the file, but sometimes when I can't sleep, I swear I still hear it. Not the voice from the well, mine, calling out from the dark, begging to be pulled back up. It was late January when I first heard about Raven Ridge. That part of the Appalachians doesn't see many tourists in winter. The roads ice over fast, the fog hangs low, and most folks who live there keep to themselves until spring. But my friend Nathan wasn't most folks. He was one of those people who loved solitude, the kind who thought peace only really existed in the sound of snow falling through pine trees. He'd hiked parts of the Appalachian Trail before, and this trip, he said, was just a quick solo weekend. Up to the ridge, maybe a night in the tent, then back down. He texted me the night before he left. "Signal's bad up there. If I don't reply for a bit, don't freak out. Just getting some headspace." He even attached a photo. His tent packed, boots by the door, that goofy half-smile he always did before a trip. That was the last normal message I ever got from him. 2 days later, I got the first voicemail. I still have it saved. I don't think I'll ever delete it. It came in at 2:14 a.m. No caller ID, just unknown. But the voice was his. "Hey, I think I'm still on the trail, but It's weird. There's someone up here. A pause, a soft crunch of snow. He's been standing by the tree line for like an hour now. I thought it was another hiker, but he's not moving. I yelled. Nothing. Then silence. Just the wind howling faintly in the mic before the message cut out. By morning, I called him back, straight to voicemail. The thing about those mountains is that losing signal isn't unusual. But something in his voice, the way he whispered that last part, it wasn't panic exactly. It was confusion, like he was trying to convince himself it was fine. I decided to wait a day. Maybe he'd already hiked down. But that night, another message came. 2:46 a.m. Okay. It's not a person. I don't think it is. Long exhale. It's closer now. It doesn't walk, it's just there. Every time I look up, it's in a different spot. I can't see a face. Just this shape. He breathed hard into the phone. That kind of shaking breath you hear when someone's holding in fear. I can't sleep. I can feel it. Watching me. Then the sound of snow shifting. Like he'd stood up, moving away from the tent. Followed by a low static hum, almost too faint to notice. And then, it's whispering my name. The line went dead. The next morning, I called the county sheriff's office. They sent a rescue crew out that same afternoon, local volunteers, a couple of rangers from the state park, even a guy with search dogs. They found Nathan's car at the trailhead, dusted with fresh snow. Inside was his phone charger, a thermos, and a folded map marked in red pen. Raven Ridge, camp here. They followed the trail up for 6 hours before the weather forced them back down. No footprints beyond a certain point. Just wind-carved drifts and white silence. The sheriff told me over the phone, "We'll try again tomorrow." Might have just lost the trail in the storm. But I knew Nathan. He was careful, obsessive with details. He'd have doubled back if he got lost. He wouldn't just disappear. And then, on the third night, 2:39 a.m. again, I got one more message. This one was shorter. It's right outside the tent. A pause, a faint tapping sound. It knows I can hear it. Long silence. I don't think it blinks. Then, just before it ended, a whisper, almost like the wind but sharper. Closer. Turn around. The call log said it came from his number. But when I tried calling back, the line didn't ring. It went straight to static. Not the kind you get from bad service, the kind that almost sounds like breathing. I didn't sleep the rest of that night. By morning, I was already on the road to West Virginia. The drive to Raven Ridge took almost 12 hours. By the time I reached the base trail, the sun was already bleeding into the clouds, orange fading into gray. The rangers had already done 2 full searches, nothing. They told me the tracks they found just stopped. Not drifted over, not blown away, just stopped. Like the snow hadn't fallen there at all. One of the search volunteers, a local woman named Marlene, told me something I haven't forgotten. She said, "You don't want to stay after dark up there. Folks say there's a place where the trees don't cast shadows. That's where it watches from." I asked her, "What is it?" She just shook her head. "Doesn't matter what name you give it. It's been there longer than the ridge. It don't leave footprints, just takes yours." That night, I camped by the trailhead. Couldn't bring myself to hike up alone in the dark. But even down there, miles from the ridge, I couldn't shake the feeling I was being watched. Every crack of the fire made me flinch. Every gust of wind through the trees sounded like someone whispering my name just out of earshot. And once, when I looked up toward the slope, I saw it. For a split second, a tall figure at the tree line, still as stone, framed in pale moonlight. I blinked, and it was gone. By morning, the snow had covered the tracks around my tent, all except one set, not mine. A single, clear footprint pressed into the snow, facing toward me, and just beneath it, written in the powder barely visible, my name. The next day, I joined the rescue team at first light. The ridge was quiet, deceptively calm. Snow clung to every branch, blanketing the world in white, and the sun's weak light made the trees look like shadows themselves. I kept thinking about Nathan's messages, how he'd said the Watcher didn't walk, just shifted, how it whispered his name. The trail up was steep and narrow. With every step, my boots sank into soft snow, leaving perfect imprints. At first, I followed the path Nathan had marked on his map, but it quickly vanished under drifts and fallen branches. Then we saw it, his tent. It was still standing, half buried, almost invisible against the snow and pine. The zipper had been left open. Inside were his pack, a sleeping bag, even a journal, but no Nathan. No signs of a struggle. Just everything as if he'd stepped out for a moment and never returned. The rangers moved around carefully, checking footprints in the snow. At first, it seemed normal, one set leading to the tent. But then one of them froze. Wait, this can't be right. I walked over. The footprints didn't just stop. They circled. Not once, not twice, but dozens of times. Endless loops around the tent. And they were all perfect. Not a single break. No signs of dragging, no impressions of kneeling or crawling. And the strangest part, they were always facing inward, toward the tent. I crouched down to examine them. Each footprint looked like Nathan's. Same size, same boot pattern. But something about the spacing, the radius of the circle, it was impossible. The loops were tight in some areas, wide in others, but always continuous. It was as if someone had been walking in circles all night, without ever getting tired. I shivered. The air was cold, but there was something else. Something heavy in the forest, like the snow itself was pressing down, keeping me from moving too fast. One of the rangers, a man named Ellis, pointed toward the trees. See that? I looked. A shadow, tall, thin, moving between the trunks, but it didn't walk. It slid. Not along the ground, not like a person. Just shifted from place to place. Every time I blinked, it seemed to get closer. I called out for Nathan. My voice carried strangely over the snow, sharp and brittle, but the shadow didn't respond. It didn't even flinch. And then I realized I wasn't the only one here. Footprints. Not just Nathan's. Another set. Smaller. Closer to the tree line. Perfectly formed, but somehow wrong. They weren't human. We set up a perimeter around the tent. Ropes, markers, flashlights. The rangers radioed for backup, but the radios crackled and hummed. Interference, they said. I noticed something else. A faint sound, just beyond the tree line, like snow being brushed aside softly, deliberately. I turned, and the shadow moved again. Closer. The rangers were whispering now. Ellis muttered, "It's watching. Always watching." I didn't doubt it. Something in the forest that night was calculating, moving along the ridges just out of sight, circling us like prey. I glanced at the footprints again. Each loop around the tent seemed longer than the last, as if the person or thing was walking faster, covering more ground. And at the very center of all the circles, Nathan's tent, the snow was oddly clean. No footprints at all. It was like the forest itself had kept him there. By nightfall, the wind picked up. The shadows stretched, twisted by the low moonlight. The loops of footprints seemed to shift subtly, almost rearranging themselves. Every now and then, a single print would appear far from the tent, as if it had teleported across the snow. I tried calling Nathan on the radio. Nothing. Then, faintly, I heard it. A whisper, soft, deliberate, coming from the ridge above us. "You can't leave." I felt my blood run cold. And then I saw it, the shadow, just at the edge of the trees, taller than any man, gliding along the ridge like it was part of the snow and mist itself. It paused, then tilted its head toward us, as if inspecting, calculating. "It's awake," Ellis whispered. "We didn't sleep that night." No one did. The shadows never left the ridge, and the whispers continued, soft and patient, circling around us like the prints in the snow. When dawn finally came, the loops had multiplied, dozens more sprawling outward, and in the very center Nathan's tent was gone. Nothing left behind, except a single boot print, facing away from the ridge, and in the snow beneath it my name. I first heard about Hushed Hollow Church from a gas station attendant in a tiny town tucked into the valleys of eastern Kentucky. It wasn't in any guidebook, and the locals didn't talk about it unless you asked very carefully. "Don't go near Hushed Hollow Church after dark," the man said, polishing a coffee mug like he'd said it 1,000 times before. I laughed nervously. "Really? What's the story?" He shrugged. "Old place. Been abandoned 50 years or more. Some folks say the bell still rings at midnight. But no rope, no floorboards left inside. People don't stay around to find out why." I could tell he wasn't joking. Curiosity, of course, got the better of me. The directions were vague, like he was trying not to remember the way. Down an unpaved road that eventually disappears into the woods. Past a collapsed barn. Across a creek where the water's always high. The road was narrow and muddy, lined with pines so tall they blotted out the sun. I had to keep the windows up because the cold wind carried whispers, or maybe it was just my imagination. Eventually, the forest opened up to a small clearing. There it was. Hushed Hollow Church. It looked like a skeleton of a building. The roof had mostly fallen in. The steeple leaned slightly, like it was listening for something far away. The walls were blackened from decades of weather, maybe fire. Windows were shards of jagged glass. Doors barely hanging. It wasn't just abandoned. It was forgotten. And yet, the bell hung high in the steeple, perfectly intact. No rope, no clapper, nothing that could make it ring. I stepped closer. Every step on the dry, broken leaves sounded louder than it should have, echoing across the clearing, bouncing back from the empty walls. The air was thick, not cold, not warm, just heavy, like the place had been waiting for someone to arrive. I asked a local hiker who had wandered into the clearing for an afternoon look what people say about the bell. He looked me straight in the eye. "You ever hear the bell at midnight?" I shook my head. "Good. Don't." "What happens?" He swallowed hard. "No one knows. Folks who've stayed the night, well, some don't come back the same. And some don't come back at all. You can hear the praying. Always praying, but no one's inside." "Not really." I frowned. "Praying?" "Yeah, something prays in there. Maybe it's the church. Maybe it's other things. You won't know until it's too late." I spent the afternoon exploring the grounds carefully. The floorboards inside had rotted decades ago. Broken pews lay scattered like fallen teeth. Candles had long since dissolved into waxless pools on the stone altar. And yet, there was an odd smell, faint incense, wood smoke, and something older, earthier, like damp soil and iron. I made notes for my recorder, quietly narrating. It's quiet, almost too quiet. Nothing moves, but there's a presence here. A stillness that isn't natural. Feels aware. As sunset approached, the forest shadows grew long. The bell looked different now. Not just a piece of architecture, but something watching. Every so often, I could swear I heard it. Faint, almost imperceptible. A metallic ting high in the steeple, like the wind brushing against it. I shook my head. The wind didn't move the bell. There wasn't even a rope. Something else had to. And I knew, even then, that I would have to return at midnight. The locals' warnings weren't superstition. They were survival. Don't be tempted by curiosity, the hiker said. The church notices. And somehow I knew he was right. I stayed, despite every warning, despite every nerve in my body telling me to leave. I set up my recorder on one of the broken pews, a flashlight on the altar, a notebook beside it. The air inside was heavier now, like the walls had absorbed decades of whispered prayers, confessions, and fear. Outside, the wind rustled the pines, but inside, silence. I tried to distract myself, narrating observations for the recording. No wind inside, no birds, just the smell of damp wood and something else, something alive. I didn't hear the first toll. Not until midnight. The bell rang. Not loud, not metallic like I expected, but deep, hollow, reverberating in the bones. No rope, no hammer, no sign of anything that could strike it. And yet there it was, ding once, ding twice, then a slow, deliberate rhythm, uneven, almost like a heartbeat. I froze. My flashlight flickered. I swear I heard the faintest movement behind the broken altar. I whispered into my recorder. It's ringing itself. I don't know how. The air, it's moving. Not wind. Something else. Something breathing. The ringing continued. Every toll resonated through the floor, through the broken walls, like it was awakening the building itself. Then I heard it. Soft, wet footsteps on the rotted wood. I swung the flashlight, heart hammering, and saw nothing. Just shadows shifting, stretching, bending as if alive. But the footsteps grew closer. And then the praying began. Not a voice, not chanting, but something older, hollow. Started low, behind the altar, beneath the pews. A slow, rhythmic murmur, like water over stones. The sound grew, filling the church, wrapping around me. Forgive, 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 forgive. The voice wasn't human. It was fractured, layered, as if hundreds of whispers were speaking at once. I realized it wasn't coming from a single place. It was everywhere inside the church. I tried to leave. Every step toward the door felt heavier, like gravity had increased, like the building itself resisted my movement. The bell tolled again, deeper now, almost mocking. The footsteps matched each toll. I looked toward the altar. There, in the flickering light of my flashlight, I saw them. Shapes, pale, thin, featureless figures kneeling and bowing, their forms shifting as though the air carried them. No eyes, no faces, just presence. And their whispers, the praying intensified. Forgive, forgive, forgive. It was then I understood. This church didn't house people anymore. Collected them. Every whispered confession, every unspoken plea, every secret sin of the past decades. They were here, alive in the air. And the The bell was their heartbeat. I stumbled back, knocking over a pew. The figures didn't move in alarm. They didn't look at me. They continued their endless prayers. Forgive, forgive, forgive. The tolling grew louder, almost deafening, vibrating through my chest. I could feel my pulse sinking to it. My breath caught in my throat. I fumbled for the door, and as I reached it, the air shifted, icy and wet. A voice, low and hollow, whispered directly into my ear. "You've heard enough." I didn't argue. I ran out into the clearing. The wind hit my face like a slap of relief. Behind me, the bell continued tolling, soft now, fading as the trees swallowed the sound. But even in the daylight, I could still feel it, the church breathing, waiting, collecting, praying. I never returned at night, but I still pass by the edge of hushed hollow when I can. And sometimes, when the wind is right, I hear it, a soft toll far away, a whisper, "Forgive, forgive, forgive." And I remember the weight inside that abandoned church. How it doesn't just stand there. It remembers. It was one of those nights in the mountains where the sky feels heavy, like it's about to press down on you. I checked into a small motel at the edge of a sleepy Appalachian town. Nothing fancy. A single-story building with cracked paint and a flickering neon sign. The kind of place where the floors creak even when no one's walking, and the air smells faintly of old carpet and pine cleaner. I didn't expect anything unusual. Just a room, a bed, and the quiet that comes with being miles from anywhere. By late evening, a storm rolled in. Thunder boomed over the ridge, shaking the windows, rattling the old pipes. Rain came down in sheets, hammering the roof with the kind of rhythm that makes you listen to every drop. I had just settled in with a cup of instant coffee when the power went out. The hallway outside went black first, followed by the flicker of the neon sign. The room was suddenly darker than it had any right to be. My flashlight illuminated only a narrow cone, and even that seemed swallowed by shadows. I thought about calling the front desk, but my phone had no signal. Typical for this region, deep valleys and dense trees played tricks on cell towers. Then the fog rolled in. It wasn't the misty, distant kind you see from a mountaintop. It was thick, wet, and immediate. It pressed against the windows, curling around the motel like smoke. Visibility dropped to almost nothing. Even the neon glow outside was muted, as if swallowed by a gray blanket. And that's when I noticed it. At first, I thought it was a trick of the light, a shadow moving just beyond the glass. But it wasn't light. It was deliberate, slow, careful movement. A figure, taller than any human, gliding just past the fogged windows of the corridor. No footsteps, no sound beyond the soft hiss of the rain and the wind. I tried to convince myself it was another guest. Maybe someone else had checked in late. But the motel was nearly empty. I'd counted the cars when I arrived. I stepped into the hallway, flashlight in hand. The carpet was damp from the storm, the air thick and cold. I called out softly, "Hello? Anyone here?" No response, just the fog. The figure hadn't moved far, and yet, somehow it had shifted closer. Always at the edge of my vision, never fully visible. I tried to shake it off. Maybe it was my imagination. Maybe it was the combination of darkness, storm, and isolation playing tricks on me. But then I heard it, a knock, slow, methodical, from the door at the end of the hallway. 1, 2, 3. I froze. It wasn't the kind of knock someone does when they need help or want attention. It was deliberate, almost patient, almost expectant. I checked the doors. Empty rooms. No one had checked in tonight. The front desk had told me before the storm. I called out again, louder this time. "Who's there?" The knocking stopped. For a moment, silence. Then, from another door farther down the hall, it started again. Knock, 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 and somewhere deep in the fog outside, I could swear I saw movement. Slow, gliding along the corridor, just beyond the reach of the window's condensation. I retreated into my room, heart hammering, flashlight trembling in my hand. I locked the door and pressed myself against it. The knocking continued, now on my door. Slow, heavy. The kind that makes you listen to every tap, wondering if it's something human or not. I wanted to look through the peephole, but the fog pressed against the glass, obscuring everything. And then I heard it. Faint, like someone whispering just outside the room. "Come out." It wasn't a voice I recognized. Not human, at least not fully. I stayed pressed against the door, listening as the storm raged on, each roll of thunder echoing the fear that had settled into my chest. The fog outside didn't just obscure the world, concealed it. Something moved within it, something that didn't belong to the night or the storm. And I realized, as I clutched the edge of the door, that whatever it was, it had noticed me. Couldn't sleep. Every few minutes, a knock echoed through the hallway. Slow, patient, methodical, not hurried, not frantic, just deliberate. I stayed pressed against the door, my flashlight dim, afraid to move. Knock, 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 started again, this time on the wall beside the door. Impossible. I live alone, I know the layout. There's nothing there that could make a knock like that. My mind raced. Is it someone? Is it something? The storm rattled the windows, but these knocks were inside the building, perfectly timed, almost intelligent. I forced myself to look through the peephole. The fog pressed tight against the glass, thick and gray, swirling as if alive. I could barely see the hallway, let alone a person. And yet, I knew something was there. Shadows shifted at the very edge of my vision. Slow, gliding shapes, taller than they should be, bending unnaturally. Every time I blinked, the shapes seemed closer, hovering at impossible angles, lingering where no one should be able to stand. The knocking didn't stop. It moved from door to door down the corridor, sometimes fast, sometimes slow, always deliberate. I could hear faint scraping on the carpet as though someone or something was testing the boundaries of the hallway. I called out, "Who's there?" No response. Only the knocks and sometimes a whisper. "You're awake." The voice wasn't behind me. It didn't echo in the hallway. It seemed to come from the fog itself, from the darkness that the storm had brought in, from the shadow just beyond the windows. I grabbed my phone to call the front desk. No signal. I checked the locks. Everything intact. Nothing had moved. And yet, I could feel it, the presence. Close. Watching. Waiting. The knocks came again, louder this time. Knock, knock, knock. I flinched. Each one felt like it tapped directly against my chest, my ribs, the very bone of me, the kind of sound that lingers in your skull. I tried to convince myself it was wind, branches hitting the building, old pipes, anything rational. But then I heard it, the soft shuffle of footsteps behind my door. Slow, careful, no weight, no thud, just movement that shouldn't be possible on a solid floor. I pressed my back harder against the door, flashlight pointing toward the hallway. A shadow shifted in the fog outside the window, taller than any man, stretching across the corridor, gliding closer. It didn't walk. It didn't run. It floated. I couldn't move. The knocks moved again, this time directly in front of me. On the door. 1, 2, 3. The whisper came again. You can't hide. I swallowed hard, heart hammering. My breath came in shallow gasps. I knew that whatever was out there wasn't human. It wasn't alive in any way I understood. And yet, it watched, always watching. The storm raged outside, thunder crashing, lightning illuminating the fog in brief, blinding flashes. In one flash, I saw it clearly, just for a moment. A tall, faceless figure, blacker than the night around it, gliding across the corridor. Its head tilted unnaturally, just enough to hint at awareness. It didn't move like a man. It didn't move like an animal. It moved like the fog itself, inevitable, creeping everywhere at once. Another knock, louder this time, vibrating through the door frame. I realized I had no choice. I couldn't stay. I had to get out. But as I moved to the door, it was gone. The fog outside shifted, but the hallway was empty. For a moment, I dared to hope. Then, far down the corridor, another knock echoed. Knock, 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 and the whisper followed. You can't leave, not yet. I spent the rest of the night in the corner of that room, flashlight trembling in my hands, praying for sunrise, praying for the storm to end, praying for the fog to lift. And all night, the knocks never truly stopped. Back home, the mountains still lingered in my mind like a half-remembered dream. The fogged roads, the ringing bell, the knocking in the motel hallway. They didn't fade with distance. They followed me, in the edges of my vision, in the quiet hum of my apartment at night. I tried to work, tried to focus on something mundane, editing photos, reading, even rewatching some old movies, but the shadows from Appalachia were there, always at the edges, just beyond the light of the lamp, just at the corner of a window where the curtain didn't fully meet. Started small, a detail in one of my old recordings. Nothing obvious at first, just a dark blur behind the trees during the whispering hollow summer. Then another, the tall, shifting shadow behind the church altar. And then the motel, the fog that wasn't just fog, a figure gliding beyond the glass. At first, I told myself I was imagining it. Coincidences, tricks of light, old cameras, old nerves. But the more I looked, the less plausible that became. I pulled out my notebooks, the ones I had scribbled in during each encounter. Every story I'd collected, every recording, every journal entry. I laid them all across the table, connecting notes with strings like some obsessive detective. And there it was, always there, a shadow, not part of the scenery, not another person, not a natural shape in the fog or the darkness. Always in the corner, just beyond the subject. Watching, I began reviewing footage, slowing it down, enhancing the shadows. In the hollow, the whispers were not alone. Behind me in the recording, there was a dark smudge against the trees, shifting with the wind. In the church, behind the pews, figures kneeling, faces indistinct, fading into nothing, but present, moving with purpose. At the motel, in every flash of lightning, a tall shape gliding just beyond the fog, the corridor never truly empty. Every encounter I'd ever had in Appalachia carried it. That presence, the observer, the one that never left. And then I noticed something else. The shadows weren't random. They followed patterns. They appeared during storms, at night, during times of isolation. They were drawn to fear, to attention, to the moments when I, or anyone else, was most alone and vulnerable. I remembered my friend on Raven Ridge, the endless circles in the snow, The watcher. The same shape, perhaps different guise, always at the periphery. I realized the truth slowly. These weren't isolated stories. They weren't local legends meant to scare outsiders. They were symptoms of something older, something patient, something that learned to wait, to observe, to collect the fear of those who wandered into its world. I pulled out my oldest notes, the first stories I had ever recorded from the hollow. And there it was again, a dark blur at the edge of every frame, every page, every memory. The thread connecting all the Appalachia encounters. A shadow that watched, that waited, that remembered. I couldn't unsee it. And worse, I couldn't shake the feeling that the shadow had begun to recognize me, to anticipate my movements, to follow me even here, far from the mountains. I started to feel it in my apartment. Corners of rooms that felt heavier. Curtains moving though no wind entered. Shadows that lingered too long, shifting slightly when I wasn't looking directly at them. Always at the edge, waiting, observing. It wasn't enough to look for it. It wasn't enough to rationalize it. The shadow wasn't just around me. It was part of the story, part of the collection, part of every whispered word, every echoing toll, every fogged corridor. And I understood then. I had drawn it out, with my stories, with my curiosity, and now it had found a way to follow me home. It started with the sound. At first, I thought it was the house settling, the old pipes groaning, the wind rattling a window, maybe even the heater kicking on. But the timing was wrong, too precise, too deliberate. Footsteps, soft, measured, echoing through the empty apartment. Not loud enough to be real, not quiet enough to ignore. I froze. I hadn't seen it yet, but I knew it was there. The shadow I had traced through Appalachia was back. Not in the mountains, not behind the church pews, not in the fog outside a motel. Here, inside my home, watching from the corners, lingering in the edges of the rooms, hiding just beyond the light cast by my desk lamp. Every instinct screamed to run, but I stayed. I had to see it, had to understand it. It revealed itself slowly, a darkness in the hallway, deeper than the absence of light, a shape that seemed to breathe with the room, moving ever so slightly when I wasn't looking directly at it. A presence that distorted the air, warping the edges of reality around it. I reached for my camera, desperate for proof. Nothing, just the faint flicker of shadow, receding whenever I tried to focus on it, only to reappear somewhere else the moment I looked away. Then came the whisper. I've been waiting, not outside, not in a recording. Right here, right next to me. I spun, flashlight trembling, but there was nothing. Only the edges of the room, stretching unnaturally, corners that felt farther away than they should be. The whisper came again, closer this time. You shouldn't have left. I stumbled backward, heart hammering. The lamp flickered. The shadow shifted with it, stretching, growing, darker than darkness itself. I realized it didn't just observe. It remembered. It recognized me. The stories I told, the places I visited, the recordings I made, they had all marked me, made me visible, made me... I tried rational thought. Maybe it was stress, lack of sleep, the memories of the hollow, the lantern man, the crying well. But deep down, I knew better. The pattern was too consistent, the presence too persistent, the fear too real. It wasn't just a shadow. It was intelligence, patient, ancient, waiting, and now it had found a way to bridge the distance. From Appalachia to my home, from memory to reality. Every room I entered felt heavier. The air seemed thicker, harder to breathe. I could feel eyes at the corners, watching my movements, anticipating my decisions. I started to notice small things. Objects slightly moved, doors ajar that I was certain I had closed, a faint draft that wasn't from any window, and always that whispering at the edges of my hearing, never fully clear, but unmistakable. You can't escape. I realized that no amount of distance, no walls, no light would stop it. The shadow wasn't bound by geography. It followed the stories, the experiences, the fear itself. Wherever I went, it would be there, just beyond perception, waiting. That night, I didn't sleep. I watched, tense, scanning every shadow, every corner, every flicker of movement. The whisper never ceased. The air never lightened. And I understood. The shadow had returned not just to watch, but to remind me that the mountains had never truly let me go. That the stories I chased, the encounters I chronicled, had only drawn it closer. It wasn't done with me. Not yet. There's a certain silence in the Appalachian Mountains that you can't find anywhere else. It's not peaceful silence. It's watchful. That's what hit me first when I crossed the state line that night. That thick, heavy quiet that hangs in the trees like fog. You can feel it pressing on the sides of the car, humming through the glass. Almost as if the woods remember your name, and they remembered mine. I told myself I was coming back for closure, to face whatever had followed me out of those hollows all those years ago. But that's a lie. I came back because I didn't have a choice. For months now, that voice, that same whisper from my grandmother's cabin, had been slipping into the edges of my recordings, even into my sleep. Sometimes, I'd wake up and swear I heard it standing right behind me, breathing in time with my own breath. I had ignored it long enough, so I packed light, a flashlight, a recorder, and my old field journal. No gun, no knife. You can't shoot what isn't supposed to exist. The road back to the cabin hadn't changed much. Same cracked asphalt, same hand-painted private property signs nailed to trees that looked older than the road itself. But the forest had grown thicker, wilder, like it had been waiting for me to leave so it could take the land back. Even the stars felt wrong that night, fewer of them, or maybe just dimmer, like the sky didn't want to look at what I was driving toward. I stopped at the last gas station before the mountain road, the same one I used to stop at as a kid with my grandmother. It was empty now, half the lights burned out, a thin fog rolling across the gravel lot. Inside, the place smelled like dust and kerosene. A single man sat behind the counter, middle-aged, eyes too tired for the hour. He looked up when I walked in, didn't say a word at first, just studied me. Then, almost reluctantly, he asked, "You headin' up to the holler?" I hesitated, then nodded. "You best be careful," he said quietly. "Ain't many folks go up there no more. Not since the bells stopped ringin'." That made me pause. He was talking about the old hush church from chapter 6, the one that had rung at midnight. "You know about that?" I asked. He just stared at me, long and hard, before muttering, "Son, these mountains don't forget, and neither does what lives in them." He wouldn't say more. When I left, I caught him watching me through the window, not with curiosity, with pity. The road up was almost gone, dirt and gravel swallowing what used to be pavement. Trees leaned in close, their branches knotting together overhead, turning the night into a tunnel. I drove slow. The air felt heavier with each mile. And then I heard it, a low hum, barely audible, coming from the woods. First I thought it was wind, but the trees weren't moving. The air was still. Then I realized it wasn't wind. It was voices, faint, layered, all whispering at once. And though I couldn't make out words, the rhythm was familiar. A pattern that made my chest tighten and my hands start to shake. It was the same whisper I'd heard as a child. Only now it wasn't calling from the hollow. It was all around me. I parked the car at the trailhead, the same one that led to my grandmother's old cabin. The place had been abandoned for years. I knew the porch would be half collapsed, the windows gone. But still, standing there at the edge of the trail, flashlight in hand, I hesitated, because the forest felt alive. Not in a poetic way, not like nature breathing, felt aware. Every step I took up that trail, I could feel something watching me. Not a single pair of eyes, but 1,000. From under roots, behind bark, between the cracks of the earth itself. The deeper I went, the more the air seemed to hum. That same layered whispering, now clearer, closer, almost recognizable. By the time I reached the clearing, the moon had risen, pale and distant through the mist. And there it was, my grandmother's cabin, or what was left of it. The roof had caved in, the door hung open, and moss crept over the wooden walls like the forest was slowly reclaiming what was once hers. But what stopped me cold was the light, a dim, flickering glow from inside the cabin, yellow, moving, like the flame of a lantern. For a split second, I thought of the lantern man. But this light didn't move like his did. This one pulsed, like it was breathing. I should have left right then. But you know how it is. Once something has haunted you long enough, you either run forever or you face it. And I was done running. I stepped inside. The air was thick, colder than it should have been. Dust hung in beams of light cutting through the broken roof. Everything smelled faintly of damp earth and old ash. And in the center of the room was my old recorder. The same one I'd lost years ago. It was sitting there on the floorboards, right where my grandmother's rocking chair used to be. Still intact, still functional, and playing. What came out of it wasn't sound, it was memory. My voice younger, nervous, laughing, asking questions into the woods. Then, beneath it, another voice, faint, crackling through the static. "You came back." I froze. The voice was older now, rougher, but I knew it. It was the same whisper from the hollow. "We've been waiting for you." The recorder shut off on its own. Then the silence broke. The forest outside began to move. Slow at first, then faster, like the trees themselves were shifting. The whispering grew louder, closer, clearer. And I realized something terrible. The voice hadn't followed me here. I had followed it back. The hollow had never stopped calling. And this time I had answered. I couldn't move. Not really. My legs felt like roots had sunk into the floorboards. The air wasn't just heavy. It was alive, thick with expectation, and every shadow in the cabin seemed to lean closer. The whispers came again, louder this time, more insistent, curling around my ears. "It's time. You've come. Just as we knew you would." I swallowed, trying to catch my breath, but the air tasted of damp earth and decay. And then I understood. This wasn't a voice. It wasn't one entity. It was many, layered and overlapping. A chorus of every sound that had haunted me in the hollows, every story I had ever chased, every recording I had ever made. The hollow wasn't calling my name. It was claiming it. The recorder on the floor started again. Static first, then a low hum that resonated through the boards. I knelt to listen, and the faint whispers coalesced into words I could understand. You've wandered long enough. You've seen. You've heard. And now you belong. I shook my head. No. But even as I did, I felt it. The floor beneath me pulsing, almost like a heartbeat. The walls breathing. The cabin itself alive, waiting. I looked out the broken window. The forest pressed close, black and infinite. Trees swaying though the air was still. Every branch seemed to stretch, bending toward the cabin. The hollow had grown arms, roots, hands of shadow reaching for me. I tried to run. I wanted to sprint down the trail, back to the car, back to the world I knew. But my body refused. My legs were not mine anymore. And from the corners of the room, the shadows began to rise. Not human, not animal. Something older, something forgotten. They shimmered and shifted like smoke, curling around the moonlight, spilling in, moving toward me with intent. We've waited a long time, it whispered. The voice now 1,000 voices all at once, echoing inside my skull. You were ours before you even left. And then I saw it. Beneath the floorboards, in the hollowed space where the earth touched the cabin's foundation, a form stirred. Not fully visible, just a shape, darker than shadow, pulsating like something breathing underground. It rose slowly, tendrils of black smoke curling around the floorboards, climbing up through cracks. And I realized it had been under the cabin all along, watching, feeding on the fear, the memories, the whispers of every person who had ever come too close. And now it wanted me. I fell to my knees, terrified, shaking, my flashlight skittering across the boards. The shadows reached, brushing my skin, cold as grave soil. And in the midst of the chaos, I understood the truth. The hollow didn't want my body. It wanted my story, my fear, my memories, everything I had ever recorded, every whispered tale I had ever told. It had waited for me to return so it could feed on the collection of my life in the hollows, folding it into itself. Tell it again, it breathed. Tell it to us, so it lives, so it never ends. The world blurred. My own voice emerged, trembling, recounting the stories. The lantern man, the crying well, the old oak, the whispers from my grandmother's cabin. And with every word, I felt a part of myself slipping away, absorbed into the hollow, merging with the shadows and whispers, becoming part of something bigger, older, eternal. Time fractured. Minutes stretched into hours, the cabin stretching with it. I was no longer outside the hollow. I was the hollow. And then silence. Absolute, suffocating silence. The shadows collapsed into the floorboards. The whispers faded. The air became still, almost peaceful. I opened my eyes fully for the first time, and I was alone in the cabin. But something had changed. I was no longer just a visitor. I had left part of myself behind. My memories, my stories, my fear, they belonged to the hollow now. And deep in the back of my mind, I knew that even if I left this place again, the hollow would remember me. Always, watching, waiting. I stepped outside into the cool night air. The forest was quiet, deceptively calm. I could see the stars now, bright and sharp, and the moon casting long shadows across the clearing. But I didn't feel safe. Not really, because I knew the truth. The hollow never forgets, and it never lets go. It waits for the next story, the next voice, the next wanderer who thinks they can escape. And now I knew it had claimed mine. You see, I used to think these stories were just tales. Appalachian folklore passed down through generations, meant to scare travelers and keep kids close to home. But that's not true. The mountains don't tell stories. They remember them. Every voice you've heard, the whispers, the crying, the footsteps in the snow, they're not memories. They're echoes. The land keeps them like the trees keep their rings, like the hollows keep their dead air. And when you listen long enough, the mountains start to remember you too. That's what happened to me. I thought I was just collecting stories, writing them down, sharing them with you. But every time I hit record, every time I whispered one of those names, it whispered back. And somewhere along the way, the line between telling and summoning got blurry. Do you remember the first story? The Whispering Hollow. That's where it started for me, and maybe for you too. I thought it was harmless, just a childhood memory, a strange sound in the woods. But I was wrong. The hollow wasn't calling me. It was calling you, because I shared it, because I let its voice travel through mine. And now you've heard it. You've heard them. If you're listening on headphones, take one off for a second. No, really, just one. Do you hear that faint sound on the other side of the room? That slow, low hiss, the one you thought was static or maybe your house settling. It's not. That's the space between the story and your world. That's where they start to slip through. They can't come all at once. Not until you finish the story. But if you've made it this far, well, you've already done half the work for them. You've invited them in. You see, that's what the hollow wanted. Not me, not my fear. It wanted to be heard, to travel. And now it's traveling through you. Every replay, every whisper, every listener who lets my voice drift into their dark room. It moves a little further. It spreads, like fog rolling down from the mountains, seeping under doors, finding the quiet corners where people forget to look. You didn't come to the hollow. The hollow came to you, and I think it's listening right now. Not to me, to you. If you don't believe me, do one thing. Don't move. Don't turn your head. Just listen. Do you hear the breath that doesn't match yours? The faint shift of something behind you, too slow, too deliberate to be the wind? That's it. That's them. You've done what I did. You've carried the voice forward. And soon, when the story ends, they'll call your name too. Not tonight, maybe, but someday soon, when you're alone, and it's quiet, and your screen has long gone dark, you'll hear it. A whisper, from nowhere, saying your name, softly, like an invitation. I've heard people say that fear makes a sound in the room. A small, subtle shift. A whisper just behind your ear. The faint creak of floorboards that shouldn't exist. A soft sigh, like the air itself is breathing. If you listen closely, if you really listen, you'll hear it. A voice so faint it could be mistaken for your own thoughts. Calling your name. Maybe it's coming from the corner. Maybe it's in the shadows of the closet. Maybe it's under your bed. Or maybe it's inside your head, mingling with your own heartbeat, your own pulse. You've been hearing it all along, through every story I've told you. Every whisper from the hollow, every lantern man, every watcher on the ridge, they were all practice. They were all invitations. And now, it's your turn. The hollow is quiet, yes, but it waits. It waits for the moment you close your eyes, when the world falls away. When the darkness behind your eyelids is the only thing that exists. Then it whispers your name, softly, patiently, closer than your own breath. And when you hear it, you'll know the truth. You've carried it here, and now you can't let it go. I want you to do one last thing before the story ends. Don't move. Don't speak. Just listen. And if you hear it, that faint, impossible whisper saying your name, don't panic. Don't look. Just remember, you've always been part of the hollow. It's always been waiting, and tonight found you